Meeting to order called the September 21st, 2022 Planning and Zoning Board meeting is in order. Let's start off with, if you don't mind, if you'll all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's go ahead and, I'm sure we've got a quorum, but just to memorialize it, to my left, we have Brad Cohn and Jay Scheckman. Down below, we have Patrick McDeague, Steve Gannon, and Shari McCartney. And to my right, we have Bill Rotella. And coming in now are Mr. John Barranco and Mary Furtick. So we've got a full board this evening. Before we move forward, I would like to see if we could get an approval of the minutes from last month's meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes from last night's meeting.
Second.
Any discussion?
Sorry, who was the second?
Bill Rotella.
Thank you.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. In addition to our board members tonight, we also have with us Ella Parker. Good evening.
Good evening.
And from the legal team, we have Dwayne Spence and Shari Wallen. And we also have Yvonne Redding, Adam Schnell, and Nancy Gassman from the, it's not the Department of Sustainable Development anymore, is it? What is it?
Development Services Department, Development Services Department, then Nancy's from the Public Works Director.
I'll leave it up to you guys, the Building Department, the Zoning Department. And taking the minutes for us tonight is Leslie Harmon. Okay. Now we get to the public swearing in. Anybody who's going to speak tonight, please stand right, raise your right hand, and be sworn in.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Lastly, before we get into this, as practice over the last few months, we've been making a motion at the beginning of the meeting to make the item or the staff reports part of the item. Is that something that we would like to do with each applicable case with the cases we have tonight? Somebody want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. All right. We will get into the first case tonight, which is case UDP S22006. Before we hear from the applicant's attorney, let's have disclosures. Steve?
Site visit.
Patrick?
Site visit.
Sherry? Mary?
Site visit.
John?
Spoke to applicant's attorney.
Bill?
None.
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 And I spoke to the applicant's counsel as well. Okay. Good evening.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board. Andrew Shine with Lockery and Chakas here representing the property owner. The application in front of you tonight is technically for a parking reduction. If this were just a site plan, it would not be in front of this board. But since it's a parking reduction, the site plan and parking reduction all get looped into the same site plan level 3. So just wanted to preface it. This is the property. It is on Northwest 19th Street, west of 95. It's currently a mostly vacant lot. The site does include a sliver of the property to the west, which you can see. It's all under the same ownership. The property to the west is a concrete cutting yard, and it's on 19th Street with a residential neighborhood behind it. We are proposing to put in a Dollar General in this site. This is the front, looks like a standard Dollar General. And this is it from the street. We'll be adding a significant amount of trees to the site, landscaping, and really beautifying the site compared to what it is today. This is the overall site plan. Let me see if I can zoom in. Under the code, this plan would require 30 parking spaces. We did a parking study showing that the peak demand is at 24 parking spaces, and it's actually, the peak demand is at 18 parking spaces. We're providing 24, and it's only during the month of December on weekdays is the peak demand of 18. So according to our parking study, we're well within the actual demand for the parking of the site. We did meet with the neighborhood association that the project is in, Rock Island Community Development Association. I do have support letters that I can pass around. We did receive unanimous support from that neighborhood association. We also held a public participation meeting via Zoom for those who couldn't make the meeting, and we held a public participation meeting with the neighborhood to the south, who's not in this but is within 300 feet. I'll pass these support letters around for reference. The site was designed with the neighborhood in mind. Instead of a concrete cutting yard, we're providing a retail store. And behind the store, we did provide a 30 to 32 foot ranges from the west to the east, a landscape buffer yard with trees to protect the neighborhood from any perceived impacts. And there's also a 5-foot retaining wall behind there in line with the neighborhood compatibility requirements. So that's the project. We do have the support of the neighborhood that the project is in, and I'm here for any questions.
So this is approval of, or you're requesting approval of the parking reduction and the site plan, or just the site plan?
Yes, the parking reduction and the site plan. The parking reduction is what made this a site plan level 3, but under the city's code, whatever the highest level of review is, the entire project gets reviewed under that.
Got it, thank you.
Any other questions before we open up to the public? Is there anybody from the public that would wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the board. Is there any additional discussion or questions for staff? Somebody want to make a motion?
I have a question for staff. If I'm not happy with the parking reduction and I vote no based on the parking reduction, I mean, I don't mind the use. So I don't understand.
So the use.
If I vote no, if I vote no, do they not have an opportunity to come back with just if they figure out something else, I don't know, it might pass anyways, but if I vote no based on the parking reduction, I'm voting no based on as well on the site plan review. Is that correct?
Correct. They're both together. If you vote no, they could rework it. If they could provide parking or shrink the square footage of the building, they wouldn't need a parking reduction and it wouldn't come before you again.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions? Somebody want to make a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion before we take it to a vote?
Sorry, who was the second? Oh, thank you.
Hearing
May
none.
I read the resolution and just clarify? Is it based on the findings of fact in the staff report and the testimony heard today?
Please.
A resolution of the Planning and Zoning Board of the City of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, approving a site plan level 3 development permit and a parking reduction for the property located at 2525 Northwest 19th Street, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Community Business Zoning District for the development of a 7,500 square foot retail business, case number UDP S22006.
Thank you. If you would call the roll, please.
Mr. Cohen?
No.
Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
Mr. Baranco?
Yes.
Ms. Spurtick?
Yes.
Mr. Matee?
Yes.
Ms. McCartney?
No.
Mr. Gannon?
Yes.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Weymouth?
Yes.
Thank you all.
Passes 6-3.
All right, I do not see Debbie Orshevsky. Is there somebody here? Okey-doke. I didn't want to move on.
Could I just
past
get
you and
clarification on
circle
that? I
back.
thought there were only 2 no's. I'm sorry.
That's
I just
what I
wanted
thought.
clarification on the
I apologize.
seven
Mr.
yeses and 2 no's.
Mr. Gannon,
Yeah, it was a yes.
thank you. 7 yeses, 2 nos.
Thank you.
Very good. So items 2 and 3 are obviously adjoining properties, same owner, so on and so forth. Can we hear them together and vote them separately? Or do we have to hear them independent?
You could hear together and vote separately, yes.
Okay, so would it be the board's pleasure to hear both items 2 and 3 at the same time and then vote separately at the end?
Yes.
Yes, that's all I
Yes.
needed. Okay, we're going to hear in tandem case UDP Z22014 and case UDP Z22015. Steve, we'll start with you with disclosures.
Site visit.
Patrick,
None.
Shari? None. Mary?
Site visit.
Jay?
None.
Brad?
None.
Bill?
None.
John?
None.
I had a site visit and I received from staff a letter from a concerned citizen in the neighborhood. Okay,
Steve Gannon needs to disclose the same thing. I forgot about the letter.
As does Bill Rotella.
Maybe we all
is
received
everybody
it?
on the
I
board?
think we all did.
Yes. We all received it.
Thank you.
All right, good evening. The floor is yours.
Good evening, Chair, members of the commission. Thank you so much for taking time for us tonight. My name is Jana Loda. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Holland & Knight, here instead of Ms. Orshevsky tonight, who is unexpectedly out of town this week. We are here tonight on behalf of the owner and applicant, 1700 North Andrews LLC. We also have with us one of the principals of the company, Mr. Jonathan Einhorn, as well as the planner with Flynn Engineering on this project, Sarah Dunegri. Before you this evening, as you just mentioned, are 2 separate applications seeking a rezoning of the property. Just to, here, make sure I can get this right. Here we go. Just to put everything in context, here is an aerial photograph of the property, which is located at 1700 North Andrews. It is located immediately to the east of Andrews Boulevard, just south of Northeast 17th Court, and is also north of Northeast 16th Place. As you can see, the property is presently vacant and totals approximately 1.2 acres. The 2 applications are seeking to rezone the property from community facility to community business for the property that immediately abuts Andrews Avenue, and to RM15, or residential multifamily low-rise medium density for the eastern half of the property. I'll take the first application, which is the rezoning from community facility to community business. This property totals approximately 0.42 acres. It is the property that immediately abuts Andrews Avenue. The property, as you can see from the image that's in the slide, to the north and to the west is already zoned community business. Also, I think what's significant to note here is the underlying land use associated with this property is currently commercial. As indicated in the staff report that was accompanied this item, that was made part of the record, the application meets the criteria for the approval of a rezoning in the ULDR, as the proposed zoning district of community business is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan with the underlying land use of commercial, and the proposed rezoning builds upon the existing community business that flanks the corridor there along Andrews Avenue and is intended to serve and support the local surrounding residential neighborhoods. The next application is the eastern half or larger portion of the property, approximately 7 acres. It is flanked, as you can see, to the north with RD15 and RM15. To the east and to the south is also RM15. The rezoning here is seeking to rezone this also from community facility to RM15, which is consistent with these adjacent zoning categories. As with the rezoning to CB, the underlying land use associated with this property is also medium residential, which is consistent with the proposed zoning of RM15. And again, as indicated in the staff report, which accompanied this item, the application meets the criteria for approval of a rezoning as outlined in the ULDR, as again, it's consistent with the comprehensive plan given the underlying land use of medium residential. It seeks to expand upon the existing RM15 zoning that you see to the east and the south. It creates, probably most importantly, a transition area between the existing residential that's there now and the proposed and existing commercial uses along North Andrews Avenue. Now, just quickly, I'd like to highlight, this is a conceptual site plan. I think it's important to note that at this point, no application for a site plan has been submitted. But this just is to give you an idea of what generally is being proposed with this rezoning. Within the area highlighted red or pink possibly on your screen, this is the area to be zoned community business. The owner is proposing up to about 5,000 square feet of commercial/office uses on that property to serve the adjoining neighborhoods. To the east will be a townhouse project that you can see shown here on this image. As noted in the backup, we did participate and fully comply with the public participation requirements. A public participation meeting was held, a fairly robust one, on August 15th of this year. As I noted earlier, it is important to note that a site plan has not been submitted. We understand, as you mentioned, that there have been some written comments circulated to the board. I had the privilege of actually speaking with the author, Mr. Gonzalez, who's here tonight, and I'm sure will come up to speak. We believe in reviewing those items that most all of the comments that were raised relate to the site plan and expect that they will be addressed and considered as part of that application process. This concludes our presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and I would like just to reserve a few moments, if possible, if needed, after the public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions before we open it up to the public? Jay?
So you mentioned, Mike, that there's two requests. One, this first one is for rezoning, right?
The two requests relate to two separate rezoning applications. I'll just go to this next screen. One application is to rezone the property from CF to CB, which is the portion along Andrews Avenue. The second application is the rezoning from CF to RM15.
And they're two separate votes, two separate items on the agenda?
Yes.
Right.
They're two separate items.
We'll vote on them separately.
And then what would you have been able to build with or do with CF?
CF, I believe in your backup for both items, it provides the information of what typically is allowed within a CF, which are community facilities, schools, police station, fire stations, that type of thing. There's a whole list of the items that are permitted. My understanding is that it was rezoned to CF at some point back in the past for some sort of a community facility that was never built.
And when would you look to submit site plans for the
My
project?
understanding is right now we're looking to rezone the property in the site plan, which, as you can see, it is in the works. It has not been finalized.
Sure.
We anticipate it to probably follow in the next month or two after the rezoning.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we open
Question for staff.
up? John?
Would anybody on our staff know why it was zone CF? Has it been zone CF for a long time, or did that happen within the last 10, 20 years?
It has been zone CF for a long time. I don't know the specific history behind it, but we've had multiple folks, come in and meet with staff to decide what they want to do on that property. So seeing that it's in front of you today with these two zoning districts, it's come a long way.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else? Okay. At this time, we'll open it up for public comment. If you would like to speak on this matter, we'll give you 3 minutes each unless you represent a neighborhood association. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak? Come on up, introduce yourself.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Matt D'Antonio, and I am the Vice President of Spanish Spring Townhomes Association. We have 53 Spanish-style townhomes with 9 buildings. The property is adjacent to the subject property, so our townhomes extend in a U-shape around the subject property. If you're looking at the diagram, they span across 3 blocks from the vicinity of Andrews and Northeast 16th Place, all the way down to Northeast 3rd Avenue, which is behind the Aquatic Center, and then back up to Northeast 17th Court, all the way to the empty lot in question, which again is at Andrews Avenue. As an association, we take pride in the townhomes, and we continue upgrading them and maintaining them spotlessly. We've recently upgraded from blacktop to brick pavers, including the aprons. We've upgraded the street landscaping. We've set funds aside every month to guarantee funding for aesthetic improvements over the next decade, including painting the exterior and pressure washing our roofs and sidewalks. So to say the least, Spanish Spring, we work hard to make this the most 3 beautiful blocks in South Middle River. The owners of the Spanish Springs Association are supportive of this initiative if we can mitigate 2 problems, and I will propose 2 solutions to those problems as well. First, there's no doubt that this is a quiet neighborhood, and we will have more traffic if we add commercial property versus if we kept it strictly residential. So in order to allow this project to move forward, we just ask for a very modest requirement, which is adding an entrance monument right after the commercial space. This is something that would benefit Spanish Spring townhomes, but would also benefit the new townhomes which are being proposed to being built. As Mr. Gonzalez had also pointed out in his letter that you all had mentioned previously, the signs that we would recommend at Northeast 16th Place, a sign like Welcome to Placido Place, Northeast 17th Court, a sign like We Love Our Children, but at both locations we are requesting a sign that would say no through traffic as part of the community landmarks. And the second and final concern is regarding noise pollution. And this is maybe a question for city staff, but Boardwalk is an establishment across the street of the subject property on the west side of Andrews. This is a strip club establishment, and it's open until 3 a.m. on some nights. So clearly nobody wants to have their living room window right next to an establishment that serves alcohol until 3 a.m. We understand Boardwalk is able to do that because they're grandfathered in due to some loophole. Prior to this meeting, I did research through public records. I was not able to find any evidence of that loophole or why they can stay open that late. So I would just ask that the board or city staff during this meeting could confirm that these new businesses would not be subjected to the same things that Boardwalk is, particularly in staying late at 3 a.m. and serving alcohol. So to the civil servants in our city, thank you for your service to our neighbors. To our zoning board, thank you for accepting the call to make our city great. And to the sponsors of this project, we look forward to collaborating and working with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to be heard? Come on up, introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Frank Gonzalez, and I believe you all received my letter. I have nothing to add besides what I included in my letter, but I would like to answer your question about the history of the site. It was around 2004, 2005 when Uptown Village was proposed. It was a Tarragon company, and I believe it was a George Perez company back then. He had promised the GLCC a new building across the street. So they were going to remain in their building until they were built a new building across the street, and that's why it was zone CF, while where the present or the former GLCC home was rezoned for multifamily commercial mixed use and parkland as well. I also would like to clarify a discrepancy I noticed on the zoning map on the presentation. It appears that on the yellow that all the land is zoned RM15. That's actually incorrect. The property to the right, which is Spanish Springs, is RM15. The townhome community to the north of 10 homes is also RM15, but all the residential property on the south on both sides of Andrews is RDS 15. I believe those are single families and any duplexes that have been grandfathered in. And I just would like to offer my remaining time in case there were any questions or anything you'd like me to go over or elaborate further.
Thank you. Any questions for him?
No, thank you for the clarification on that use of that site, because I was involved with Tarragon back then, and I thought this was the same property, and I remember they were going to establish some sort of facility there. But my memory's not so good anymore, so thank you.
Any idea why they didn't build the facility? Just out of curiosity.
Well, Tarragon, they pulled out of business and sold a lot of their properties here, so that was during the slowdown, and they let those properties go. So they never went forward with the development. That was my recollection. Take it for what you will.
Thank you.
Frank, I have a question.
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Okay.
Steve. You're down there, I'm a kid.
I know.
You're on the lower tier.
Forgotten, right, yeah, always. You live at 217 16th Court, I saw it during my site visit, that house is being renovated very nicely.
It's being renovated, right, so I'm not living there right now. Previously, I lived on Northeast 16th Place, which is directly on where this site is.
Okay, thanks a lot. I needed to know that. Anyway, nice job with your renovation.
Thank you.
Job writing the letter. Let me see if I have any other. I made notes, but I think I've answered them all. They've been answered. Yeah, I'm good.
I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. This isn't a site plan, this is just a rezone. So the comment before with the monuments and things of that nature, those generally come during a site plan, right? So like the applicant would come back, say like they want these certain things done, and you guys and anybody would say, we object to whatever it is, and unless these different things are done. Did you have a discussion with the applicant as well? I know there was a discussion held.
I had a discussion with
The applicant's attorney.
Today, and it was explained to me that this was just a rezoning, but I just wanted my concerns to be made public record from the beginning of the process.
Understand, but everyone understands where we're at today is just for the zoning part of it. So everybody that's making comment, I don't know if there's more additional people that are making comment, but if there are additional people making comment, the thing that's before us today is just for the zoning. It's not for the site plan, which a lot of these comments are for, although we always appreciate comments. I especially appreciate comments from the neighborhood, but just so you understand that and everybody else understands that, right? Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. Sir, would you like to be heard? Please step up, introduce yourself.
Hello, my name's Robert O'Dore. I'm actually Frank's partner, and we've lived in this community for quite a while, and we've rehabbed and redone several houses, and we've won numerous awards from the city for making our houses look better and the neighborhood look better. The only concern from the rezoning is, again, the commercial. And when we looked at what they had proposed was that the commercial entrance, they would have to pull into or go onto Northeast 16th Place in order to access the commercial space. And we would rather have that traffic for the commercial come right off of Andrews instead of coming through a residential street. And normally when people go through, in that direction, they usually go through the community as well to exit. Well, that's a possibility, of course. But so that's my only comment on the zoning for commercial is just, again, the fact that if we had a bar or a restaurant and people going through the neighborhood at that time of night. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to be heard? Hearing, seeing none, we'll close the public portion of the meeting and bring it back to the board for discussion.
Sure. I mean, I'll start us off. I mean, I think that, just my thoughts, I think that the rezoning in and of itself makes a lot of sense. I was disappointed to hear that the stuff to the south is RDS, because I do think that was misrepresented, maybe not intentionally. Is it there? It says RDS. Oh, it's not RDS, you're saying. Okay, either way, even if it were RDS, I still think that both the rezonings fit with the area. It's not anything egregious. It's in line with the character of the neighborhood and all. all of the uses that you expressed. Thank you for coming to express those and put them out on public record so that the city and us and everyone knows. As Brad was saying, we are not in this capacity able to say, oh, yes, we can approve this rezoning if you do this for the neighborhood or if you do that, because it'd be almost like quid pro quo, and there's legalities with that. So with that being said, what I would feel comfortable what I'd like to ask the applicant is, would you be willing to agree on the record that you would, in pursuing the site plan, will work with and consider the concerns of the neighborhood and especially the ingress and egress of whatever project you're proposing?
Yes, as I mentioned to Jana Loda once more for Holland and Knight, forgive me. As I mentioned during my conversation with Mr. Gonzalez earlier today, the site plan has not yet been finalized, and Ms. Orszewski has assured me that her commitment was that once that plan was finalized, that they would actually go back and meet again with the South Middle River Civic Association to present those plans. And I am sure that the items that were raised in the letter would be considered as part of the DRC review, and we encourage them to be involved in that process as well. And just to clarify one thing, because I had this handed to me by our planner, this is the document that we received from the city of Fort Lauderdale with respect to the zoning, and I believe that everything around the property is RM15 to the east and the south, but we will double check that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so
Chanel, you want to add something to that?
So to the south as well as east of the property, it is zoned RDS 15. And to the northeast of the property, it is RM 15.
Okay. Well, again, my view still stands the same. That it's disappointing. I don't know how that ended up in the package that way. We should definitely look into that because it's important. But I don't think that changes my perspective overall about whether or not this is compatible. So I will move to approve the item UDP, I think it's Z22014, with based on the staff's conclusions and conditions, and including if the applicant will agree to continue to work with the adjoining neighbors to ensure that whatever project they proposed does not adversely impact. And before Dwayne Wayne takes, understanding, it's just a very fluffy, something that you're just agreeing, stating your intention on record. Obviously, it's not like anything with legal teeth.
Assistant City Attorney Dwayne Spence, we appreciate the board members' comments, but I need to remind the board that it's only the criteria for rezoning that you may consider in your motion and your motion to approve. So I would recommend that the record has been made with the comments to the applicant, but as part of the motion, that those comments not be a part of it.
Before we amend the comments and all, let me see if there's anybody else on the board that wants to make comments before we start making motions, and then we can come back and revisit that. Is there anybody else that wants to weigh in on this first item?
Yep, Mike, if you don't mind. I would too, and this is just for the developer's benefit, because obviously we're only voting on the zoning right now. One question for staff. If they're proposing, it appears to be 10 units, and it appears to be a commercial building less than 5,000 square feet. It doesn't seem to me that they would ever come before the Planning and Zoning Board again for that approval. Is that correct?
That is correct. It will have to go through DRC. The CB zoning is within, I believe, 100 feet of residentially zoned and used property. So notification will be provided to the neighborhood association, and they can attend the DRC meeting and provide all applicable comments.
And that's the benefit of the developer and to the neighborhood association here tonight, so they can get together and discuss that before they do go through a DRC. The one concern I had, and this is not going to be part of my decision, I think everything that we've seen tonight, I'd also like to see evidence, Adam, of that map, because obviously in our packet we were presented something, that is completely contrary to what you're telling us. So I'd like to see that evidence of the map before we're done here. But
Chair, if I could, so in looking at our GIS map, that information that's in front of you that was presented and that's in the backup is based on the city's GIS, and those are the correct zoning districts that Ms. Jana alluded to, which is RM15. I think the misleading information is on the property appraiser's website, which reflects the RDS. So that's something we'll look into to correct, but the information in front of you tonight is the correct information.
The staff reports themselves also indicate the proper zoning districts of RDS and RM15 in narrative form.
hold
The
on
map-
a minute. Did you just counter what Ella said, though?
Yes, I'm not sure where you're seeing RDS. It's RM15 on the map.
RM15 as well as the RDS 15 that was in question to the south.
That's what's on the property appraisers, not our city's
Mhm.
zoning.
Oh, if you just click on the individual parcels, it'll come up on RDS 15.
You're conflicting with Ella, so you guys figure it out and let us know. It sounds like you guys are
Sheldon.
conflicting.
Well, you were saying is that there's two pieces of
I'm
information.
not saying anything. Ella's saying, talk to Ella.
There are two pieces of information out there that
Did
may
you
be
want us to just take like a 5-minute break to just look into this and get back to you? Do you want us to do
Please.
that?
That'd be a good idea.
Because maybe
Thank
that's
you.
better than guessing. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you.
Take a 5-minute recess. Shed some light on this for us?
Yes, so it's a problem with coloring on the map. So I apologize. The RM15 on the map makes it appear like the entire area is RM15 and it's labeled as such because the two colors are really similar. The staff report does reflect the correct information. To the south, there is RDS 15. RM15 is sort of directly to the north of and adjacent to the project. And this is something we'll obviously have to correct on our property reporter page on the website to make sure that the two colors are not so closely together that they look like one and that we put the proper labels on them. When you zoom out the map, what it does is, it just places the label in a larger area, so it's not close enough to see that that other area is actually a little bit different. You could see the line, it's just a faint black line that kind of separates the two districts, but it does erroneously sort of, you see that it's RM15. I could see how it could be misinterpreted.
But to Jay's point, it's still consistent with the
Correct.
adjacent zoning.
Yes, and it was analyzed as such. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
We will
Any
make
other
sure to
questions?
correct that as this
Thank you,
item moves
Adam.
forward.
Adam,
you.
for the record, I knew you were right.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
So with that said, I just want to be sure that I communicate this to the developer. One of my concerns, and this is communication to staff too, and to the designers is, I know you're not going to get access for that commercial property off of Andrews, just won't happen. You're always going to come in one of those adjacent roads, but I did have a concern with that road being a cut through. Just seemed a little dangerous having that residential backing up to the commercial there with that cut through there. Could be an opportunity for somebody to go through there a little too quick. So I would probably do some traffic calming or something. I did not see any trash receptacles. They may be on there because I had 8.5 by 11s here, but I would look at locating a dumpster. And I'd look to the market because that commercial property, it didn't seem very viable given the depth of the bays and the size. But that's just more under advisement. I'm going to go ahead and support the rezoning because I do think it's consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
I wanted to mention that I agree that after driving around there, those townhomes are very nicely kept, and the neighborhood does look nicely quiet, and there's a lot of pride in all the houses, the way they're taken care of. I think that the density looks fine, even if it's ends up a little more than what the real density of those townhomes are. It's still a transition to the commercial. That said, I did want to clarify, as John said, we will never see this again, probably. It'll go through DRC. So the developer and the association will have to work together during DRC to get your issues addressed and get whatever you want out of this. Everyone understands? Okay.
Anyone else? Would you like to restate your motion after what Mr. Spence suggested?
Yeah, sure. I'll restate it, even though we've put some fluffy conditions on a lot of site plan reviews before, but that's okay. I'll move to approve UDP Z22014 with staff conditions, and because I believe it meets the criteria and intention of the ULDR.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. McTeague. Any further discussion before we put it to a vote? If you'll call the roll, please.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
Mr. Barranco?
Yes.
Ms. Furtick?
Yes.
Mr. McTeague?
Yes.
Ms. McCartney?
Yes.
Mr. Gannon?
Yes.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Weymouth?
Yes. Motion passes 9-0. Thank you. All right. With that one down, would somebody like to make a motion on case UDP Z 22015?
Move to approve UDP Z22015 with the conditions and recommendations of staff because it meets the ULDR's criteria.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rotella. Any additional discussion before we take it to a vote? Please call the roll.
Mr. Cohen,
Yes.
Mr. Scheckman,
Yes.
Mr. Barranco,
Yes.
Ms. Fertig,
Yes.
Mr. McTeague,
No.
Ms. McCartney,
Yes.
Mr. Gannon,
Yes.
Mr. Rotella,
Yes.
Mr. Weymouth.
Yes. Motion passes 8-1. Thank you. All right. Next case, UDP T 22010. Good evening.
Good evening, Chair and members. My name is Dr. Nancy Gassman. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director in charge of sustainability for the City of Fort Lauderdale. What you have before you tonight are proposed changes for the ULDR sections related to seawalls and adding a section on tidal barriers. The city created a seawall ordinance modification in 2016 where they set a minimum seawall elevation at 3.9 feet NAVD 88. In addition, some of the other aspects of that ordinance included recommending that the design of the seawall be created for future heights adjustments up to 5 feet NAVD. It set both along with that minimum height elevation, it also set a maximum height elevation for both the seawall and the dock based on the property's base flood elevation. And in addition, there were a number of provisions that allowed the city to site properties to improve the seawalls based on both being in disrepair and allowing tidal waters to exit the property and impact public rights of way or adjacent property owners. So any new seawall or any seawall that required substantial repair would trigger the requirement for the new minimum or maximum height. It also allowed fixed docks to extend 10 inches above the adjacent seawalls, and it addressed floating docks in a way that had not been addressed before. In 2018, the Army Corps of Engineers, working with Broward County, did a flood risk management study, at one of the conclusions of which was a regionally consistent seawall minimum height. Broward County incorporated that into their land use policies as well as into their code of ordinances. And that new regional standard is for all tidal flood barriers, so not just seawalls, but any major structure between a tidal water body and an upland property, that minimum seawall or top of bank elevation would have to be 5 feet NAVD by the year 2050. So within the Broward County Comprehensive Plan and their land use plan, the intention is to have a regionally consistent top elevation for seawalls and other tidal barriers in all of the tidally influenced municipalities across the entire county. And again, that tidal flood barrier would have a minimum elevation of 5 feet. So this is a picture of Isle of Palm seawall. The previous seawall on the left was somewhere around 1.2 to 1.5 feet NAVD 88, and the city has elevated that seawall up to 5 feet NAVD to give you a sense of what the difference of that elevation is and what the visual impact is. That's also true for the Cordova seawall that the city recently elevated. The Army Corps of Engineers, in part, was looking at the regional sea level rise projection. This is a projection that has been accepted by the City Commission for planning purposes. When you consider that our current mean sea level is in the range of 0 feet NAVD, the idea is that the useful life of a new seawall or tidal barrier would be effective against sea rise through the useful life of that seawall, which is about 50 years. So the key modifications to the ULDR is in 3 separate sections. The first section is 19.3, boat slips, docks, boat davits, hoists, and similar mooring structures. The main changes here was a slight change in the definition of mooring device and mooring structure. We removed all the language that was associated with the seawall specific elevations and focused this section exclusively on docks. And we had changed the dock maximum elevation above the associated tidal barrier or shoreline structure from 10 inches to 12 inches. The major changes come in a new section, 19.13, related to resilience standards for tidal flood protection. The majority of the changes that you see in this section are prescriptive from the Broward County Model Ordinance. It includes providing a set of definitions, extending the elevation requirements from seawalls exclusively to include all potential tidal flood barriers. It requires that minimum elevation of 5 feet at NAVD 88 for new or substantially repaired tidal barriers. In our ordinance, it allows for structures permitted before January of 2035 to be built at a lower elevation, but it must be designed to be able to be elevated to the higher elevation by January of 2050. And we have also established a maximum elevation similar to what we had before related to BFE. Following our discussions with the Marine Advisory Board on September 1st, we were approached by a representative of the seawall and development industry expressing concerns that BFE alone was not an appropriate maximum elevation, and that with the new FEMA flood requirements and changes in the maps, there were individual properties that were attempting to build tidal barriers at elevations up to 9 feet, which is not consistent with the intent of this ordinance, which is to preserve the visual views of the adjacent neighbors, as well as preventing having our waterways turn into big canyonized areas with only large concrete structures on either side. And so an addition was made to say that the maximum elevation for tidal barriers in relation to that base flood elevation of the property, or 6 feet, whichever is lower. In addition, this requires tidal structures built where there was no previous seawall in place to provide some sort of habitat enhancement, to encourage incorporation of living shorelines, and a city-specific provision has to do with the city engineer's ability to issue a waiver for structures with habitable floors that are less than 4 feet NAVD 88. There's also a disclosure required under the county's model ordinance related to the sale of real estate where there is a tidal barrier in place or that might have a tidal barrier potential for that location. And finally, there's an alteration in section 47-39 related to ensuring that these properties located in annexed areas of the city also require compliance with the tidal barrier flood protection measures. What has not changed between the 2016 seawall ordinance and this new tidal barrier ordinance is that the substantial repair threshold remains at 50%, that it continues to require that seawalls and tidal barriers are maintained in good repair, and if they are sited, they will need to make those repair within a 1-year time frame. Also requiring owners to prevent tidal waters from entering their property from impacting others. Similarly, 1 year for remediation if sited. And then we continue to provide guidance on both a minimum and a maximum top elevation. The concepts and the text of the ordinance has been supported by Broward County. I'll get to that in just a minute. Previously, the concepts related to this were supported by the Rio Vista Civic Association, and the majority of the text, with the exception of that one note that I just made, the Marine Advisory Board had supported the text as of September 1st of this year. When the text was provided to Broward County, they have determined that this is in compliance with the requirements of the model ordinance. But their one request was that the waiver language is not consistent, but that they would consider it in substantial compliance if we amended the language to define the length of the term for such a waiver. And that has been added to the ordinance since that time. Part of what comes before you as the Planning and Zoning Board is a determination of whether this is in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Within the document, the staff report that you received, there was an inadvertent correction that we left out a word for the comprehensive plan consistency. The staff report refers to the future land use element and the neighborhood compatibility, which states to protect existing and future residential neighborhoods from impacts created by more intense adjacent uses. In addition to that, there are other portions of the comprehensive plan which are related to this ordinance, specifically under the neighborhood resilience portion of it, to create resilient neighborhoods that can adapt to climate change and sea level rise through this tidal barrier ordinance, to increase protection related to building flood protection. And there is a very specific policy within the climate change element related to this item that the city would adopt these changes once a model ordinance was issued. And with that, the item before you is for a request for recommendation to move this item, to find it in compliance with the city's comp plan, and to move it forward for consideration by the city commission. And with that, I'll stop.
Okay, I have a question.
Go ahead.
So
Hang on, let me do a little, let me open and close the public comment period. Just that, obviously, I think it's a foregone conclusion. There's nobody here, but is there anybody from the public who wants to be heard on this? Seeing, hearing none, close it. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Mike. My question is on the provision about implementing measures where there were none previously. If your existing situation was prior to 1935, is that the date? 1935?
No.
Or
I'm not completely sure which piece you're referring to. That's interesting. If you build a new seawall prior to, build a new seawall prior to, I think it's 2035. Apologies.
Dwayne Spence, Assistant City Attorney. That's the January 1st of 2035. Is that what you're referring to?
No.
2035, not 1925. 2035.
Correct.
Wasn't there something in there that talked about if there haven't been any measures that have taken place already, then you would be required to implement
Right,
measures?
so there's no specific date, but what it says is that if you don't currently have a tidal barrier,
Yeah.
and you decide to install a tidal barrier, or you are compelled to install a tidal barrier, then you have to provide for habitat improvements.
Right.
And that is part of the Broward County Model Ordinance.
Okay. So does this legislation, if adopted, require anybody whose property is as it is to make any type of improvements or put them out of any type of conformance with today's, regulations?
Only if they are found to allow tidal waters to trespass across their property and impact others, or if whatever is currently existing there is in disrepair.
Okay. So if somebody, for example, on the aisles, to pull a more obvious example, no offense, Mary, water from the Tidal is coming over from on their property. You know, I mean, the whole thing can during King Tide, like as you showed, like what responsibility would a property owner have?
If the property owner is cited by the city for allowing the trespass of tidal waters, they would have to elevate their seawall to the new regional consistent standard within 1 year of being cited.
And how far does the tidal water need to go? Does it need to go past their property line?
It needs to either impact the adjacent property or it needs to impact the right-of-way.
Okay. That just stands out as a red flag to me in all of this, in that.
That's consistent with our current ordinance.
Oh, that's not changing.
That aspect of it is not changing.
Okay.
The main thing that's changing is the term seawall versus tidal barrier.
But in fact, Jay, many of the egregious ones in our neighborhood are city seawalls. I don't know how this is impacted, but about 5 years ago, as you know, many of us went and took pictures citywide, and we found a citywide issue with this, which I think is what you're trying to address. I'm not talking about the city having problems, but just it is a citywide problem of the water coming over or intruding. So, but just in our neighborhood, in case you want to make a note, it's mainly the city. We're hoping that someday the city is going to actually fix those seawalls. And if you look along Las Olas and some of the places, and they have addressed some of this, where you've seen those king tides in recent years, it's in places where the city seawalls, where it's actually literally coming over.
Oh.
So, am I explaining that right, Nancy? I know you've talked to our associations at length about this.
The city is also responsible to respond to this ordinance. And through the city's seawall plan, we have laid out a plan over the next 5 to 10 years to replace or elevate those seawalls. All the seawalls that the city is currently replacing are already meeting that 5-foot minimum regional consistent standard.
And can you just broadly give us an idea of how much your definition from seawall to tidal water is going to expand the pool of people who are now out of compliance?
In fairness, the answer is it doesn't, because you have to meet the standard of tidal waters are trespassing your property. So it really addresses all existing seawalls, and the citation aspect of that is no different than the current seawall ordinance. What is different is the requirement for the height that you will have to build to when you replace that seawall under that citation.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any comment or question?
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sherry.
So if I could get some clarification on a couple of things, please. The waiver.
Can we have your mic turned on, please?
Okay. Sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks. I'd like to get some clarification on a couple of things. One being the waiver criteria and the scope. Could you explain that a little bit?
So the reason the city's previous seawall ordinance had a waiver requirement, waiver option is probably a better way to state it. And the reason for that is that there are still properties with base flood elevations or finished floor elevations that are below the current seawall elevation requirement. And in order not to drive people out of their homes in a situation where their seawall is found to be non-compliant, the city has adopted this waiver approach to allow for those properties to be able to come into some type of compliance without coming into full compliance, in order not to put them in a situation where they would be installing a seawall at an elevation that actually would threaten the property. So to simplify that, the minimum elevation of a seawall or tidal barrier is intended to keep the ocean out. The maximum elevation of a tidal barrier is intended to prevent stormwater from coming back from the base of that seawall into the house. So if you build a seawall that's higher than the finished floor and it rains, the water will run toward the house instead of away from the house.
So, but then, so someone makes the determination of the waiver, and what's the criteria?
The city engineer makes that determination based on a set of criteria that they request in terms of the information that the homeowner provides.
So the city engineer has pretty much broad authority to make that determination?
They do. In the way that is proposed. And we have issued a number of these waivers to date since we originally adopted the 2016 requirements.
And how long does the waiver last?
The waiver is a 3-year waiver, which has to be renewed.
Could you also give me some clarification on the habitat enhancement? What is that exactly?
So that's an interesting provision that is in the Broward County Model Ordinance. And there are new seawall manufacturers that create a textured seawall, which allows for things like oysters and algae and other flora or fauna to more easily attach to the seawall to allow creation of habitat. And so it is, as part of the Broward County Model Ordinance, that new seawalls put in places where there were never seawalls before have to meet that requirement.
And how is that specifically defined? Is that defined anywhere in
The language that you see before you is the limitation of the criteria.
That's the extent of the definition of what that is? Okay. All right, thank you.
Is that it, Sherry?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else? Mary?
Well, I didn't think of this till she started asking her questions, but you have a 365-day limit. Is there a way to get an extension on that if there's, I'm just thinking about how many of the things that come before us get extended for 5 years, 10 years. So what I'm wondering is what is the reason, if you have a reasonable thing, what accommodations are you making and what's the process?
So I think
is that similar to the waiver process?
Yeah, I think the question you're asking is there a difference between what's written in the ordinance and how it ends up being implemented?
Yes.
And generally speaking, yes, there's to date, I can only speak to date, but that 365 days, as long as a property owner who has been cited is showing reasonable progress toward meeting the requirement, they do get extensions beyond the 365 days.
And so I guess my next question would be, is it necessary to include that in case, now you have a reasonable, you have a staff member or an engineer who's reasonable, but all of a sudden somebody comes in and they treat people differently than before. Is there a way to, no, I'm just.
The Broward County ordinance was actually based on the city of Fort Lauderdale's initial ordinance. And in our initial ordinance, we had 365 days, and that was adopted by Broward County as part of their model ordinance. And so we do not have, in order for us to be compliant with their ordinance, which is what the requirement is with land use, we have to maintain that language.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Jay, you want to take another stab at something?
I mean, I just was surprised by the list, if I'm being frank, of just groups that had signed off on it. Okay, Marine Board, and then Rio Vista Civic Association, which is great. And then there was one more. Usually we see a pretty robust list, and I'm just wondering how did you choose the public the public options that you went to, and is there maybe more that should be done before we vote on something like this?
I will be speaking for a second time in front of the Council of the Civic Associations in October. I've also been invited to speak to the Lauderdale Isles Civic Association, I believe in early November. The reason that we did not do as robust an outreach on this ordinance as we had done in the previous ordinance was that we are significantly mandated by the county to adopt the majority of these provisions. So it's not that we're not trying to let people know that it's out there, but there's very little opportunity for us to dramatically modify the language.
Can I just say that you did an extraordinary job of outreach when you did this 5 years ago? I mean, I know you came to our association and many others, as well as other citywide groups.
Yeah.
So
I did 20 meetings in 6 weeks. And as a result, we substantially changed the ordinance to the ordinance that currently exists. And again, I think that's one of the reasons
But
why
this
Broward
time we
County
can't.
used it as a basis.
But this time we can't.
We don't have the same ability to take that feedback and make modifications.
What's changed? I'm sorry, but what's changed?
well, she's coming in compliance.
Because we have to come into compliance with Broward County's model ordinance.
Okay.
Wouldn't we still want to hear, what's troubling to me is when we do something that limits an individual or puts some sort of rule of law on an individual and their property, even though I understand that it's coming into compliance and there's very little change and things of that nature, I'm uncomfortable with not hearing from, doing as much outreach as we can to hear from the public. I understand that you might not be able to change it because it's county, but I think that the citizens of Fort Lauderdale should be able to hear that this is coming into fruition, what it is. I'm uncomfortable with this waiver. If someone's property is lower than their next door neighbor now, then they get flooded out, and now they're going to have walls that are taller than their building on either side of them possibly. Then all the water comes onto their property. I'm just uncomfortable with it. I understand, and listen, I know that this is your job. I'm uncomfortable with saying, yeah, okay, I'm going to tell the citizens of Fort Lauderdale that I'm okay with this, and we didn't do enough outreach just because we can't really, there's no wiggle room on this. We're coming into, maybe the citizens of Fort Lauderdale want to see what this is, and then maybe there's changes that they want to make on the county commission. I don't know. But I'm uncomfortable with the fact that whenever we limit someone's right on their own property, I'm uncomfortable with not hearing from individuals and doing as much as possible. And it could be just like this. Could be no one's going to be here. I don't know. But not to do it because, and again, I'm not shorting you in any way. I'm just saying, but not to do it because we don't feel there's enough wiggle room, it is uncomfortable to me.
Yeah,
because I don't like forcing something down someone's throat, even if it is, I understand that we're coming into compliance, I still would prefer, and I'd feel more comfortable hearing from people in the community how this is going to affect them, and then maybe those voices somehow get heard by the county commission, and maybe something is changed. And it could be that I'm totally off base, and maybe it doesn't ever get changed. I understand that, but I'm just not comfortable saying, okay, I'm going to force you to do this and in an empty room. It feels not right to me, but
So
that's not my 2 cents.
And not to pile
allow me to
on,
address
Brad, but I mean, this is not a small ticket item. For every person that's impacted by this, it's 6 figures.
Yeah.
I don't, 50-foot waterfront, which there aren't very many of those, it's a $65,000, $75,000 fix.
And
$1,000.
if I could add one more thing,
$1,000
Mike.
a foot.
I'm sorry?
If I could add,
$1,000 a foot.
Easily.
Yeah.
And by the way, Brad, you raised a really good point because, as you know, I live in, I would like to say, the second oldest neighborhood in the city, and we have neighbors currently that are experiencing what you're saying when the properties next door. I know you hear these complaints, Nancy, when the properties next door build up and the flooding comes to them. So
yeah,
I mean,
and
these are realistic things that are going to have to be resolved. And I don't know whether you pass this forward and you get a group to start looking at what you can do. But, you know, obviously, as we move forward in trying to deal with sea level rise, we're going to have to deal with more and more issues.
So you've brought up 2 separate points. One is the public outreach portion of it, and the other one is how adjacent properties are impacted. So on the public outreach, when we went through this process in 2016, as Mary pointed out, there was extensive public outreach, which resulted in I'm going to say, comfortable public policy that the majority of people on both sides felt was good public policy to move forward on. So that public outreach has brought us to a point where, in my opinion, we have the public's concurrence on the current existing ordinance. When we went through this process previously, it was the Marine Advisory Board and the Council of Civic Association outreach that resulted in requests for additional outreach to the various other homeowners associations. When we provided that outreach previously to the Marine Advisory Board and to the Council of Civic Associations, there were no additional requests for outreach on this topic. In terms of how the changes are, earlier Jay had noted, well, I don't want people to be cited. The change in this ordinance is not how and when we cite individuals. The change in the ordinance is the minimum elevation that you have to build to.
That's it.
That's the major change in the ordinance, is the minimum elevation that you have to build to. So you're concerned about one neighbor builds a high seawall and another neighbor builds a high seawall, and then all of a sudden the water is all coming across into this one person's. It's not how the ocean works. Yeah, it's not how the ocean works.
I
One person
understand. It's
builds
just
a
how I've
seawall.
seen it work.
Yeah,
So
well,
maybe, I don't know.
so
I've
there-
seen people who have walls and have a higher elevation, and it could be that water's going back
Right.
into the ocean. I don't know, but I've seen houses.
No, but that's the key,
those
is that
two that are
it's
flooded.
by the seawalls being raised on either side of a property, it doesn't drive more tidal waters into the lower elevation property.
But does it keep more water on
The potential is for that to create a problem for stormwater.
right?
And there are existing provisions within our ordinances that require individual homes that are adding fill to keep that water on their property. So while the ordinances are there to try to prevent the stormwater impact associated with elevating other properties, that would not force that other home, that lower elevation home, to have to raise their seawall or put in a tidal barrier.
If I may, I understand that part of the concern that's being expressed here is that when I review the map that you showed of Broward County, there's one place that struck me as having a lot more tidal seawater, than the rest of the county, which is Fort Lauderdale.
Mm-hmm.
And when we pass something within Fort Lauderdale, we have the benefit of hearing from the people who are going to be directly impacted from that, and it makes a much more arduous process. It's painstaking, but ultimately, there are clarifications that are made. For example, like the wildlife habitat, determination. I mean, it's so broad. And in this case, the legislation is coming from the county. And so we're saying, oh, well, the county imposed it on us, but there isn't really anyone else in the county that is affected as much by this as us. Mm-hmm. So that's why, I have some trepidation over just recommending something that hasn't gone through much of a process of people being able to flush through, what concerns there can be and what improvements can be made.
Right, and please keep in mind that Broward County went through a public process in order to adopt their ordinance as well.
Mr. Chair,
Anyone else?
may I?
Mr. Bronco?
And everybody pretty much picked up on a lot of my concerns as well. And I don't think anybody up here is an expert when it comes to floodwater. I certainly am not. I look to lean on people who know this stuff, engineers, right? And I do the same thing at work. They know engineering, and I trust them for this. But, looking at our history in Florida, we're famous, right? The Army Corps of Engineers, what did they do? They redirected all the waters into these canals to control water from coming into developed areas to protect us and our homes. And we killed the Everglades, and we killed the Gulf of Mexico, and we killed the Keys, and we killed the reefs. And there's a lot about Florida that I think is important in the nature, right? I'm not an expert, but I see our history, and now we're trying to correct that history. So we're trying to increase the flow through the Everglades. We're trying to create these flowing rivers again, and all these things. And I remember something came before us recently. I'm not sure what it was. It was something to do with resiliency and containing water, and some of the things that were being done in parts of Europe that are flood prone is they would have public plazas that would allow water to intrude the public plaza. And you'd hold that water there temporarily while this thing happens, then you allow it to go. Seems to me by constricting it, it's like your heart, right? You're constricting the arteries rather than letting it kind of spread out. And I sit on the board at the Friends of Birch State Park. I've been on that board for a while, and we built a huge seawall there. Well, to your point, we're kind of running into issues now with the heavy rains, and the water doesn't dissipate fast enough. It doesn't get over the seawall. We had a low seawall before. We added a bunch of seawall. Now we're kind of containing water. So I don't know what the right answer is. I just know that, the experts who suggested we do this, it was the Army Corps of Engineers working with Broward County. I don't know if they're the, preeminent experts on this. They've already have a track record where they kind of screwed things up. So I personally would not vote for this because I don't understand it. And and I know, again, this is another one of these rubber stamps, Mary, we've done these rubber stamps before, and we've had this argument before with staff where like, well, why are you bringing this to me if what I say doesn't matter? And that's kind of what I feel like here. I just don't know enough about it to make an educated judgment here. So.
And I think you make a good point, and as you know, I'm not a big rubber stamper, so.
Yeah.
But this issue is so complex.
It is.
And we're seeing just a fraction of it tonight. I remember 20 years ago, the newspaper published a picture of where sea level rise would be because we assume it's just us. And everybody thinks first, Las Olas Isles, we're going to be sunk. But where are the first two stormwater projects that the city's doing with their $200 million bond? River Oaks and Edgewood. So at the time that map came out, Southwest Broward was actually potentially going to have higher sea level rise problems than we were. And we don't think of that because we don't think of the Everglades or how we're built or anything else. So this is a really complicated issue, and I'm with you. I don't understand any of it. I mean, I listen to my neighbors, and we do have this concern about these couple seawalls. But I think we're at a point where, yes, we need to do that, and the city has a sustainability advisory board, and they review some of these issues, and I don't know whether there needs to be a special task force, but in the interest of being in compliance with the county, who apparently based their research on our research, it seems like what we're doing is raising the minimum from 3 point whatever to 5, and I'm not sure it's worth holding it up. I think the more prudent thing would be to get this passed and recommend when we get to go to the city that the city create some kind of a task force to review our code in context of sea level rise. So I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, Dr. Gassman, or not.
I understand your point.
Anyone else? Mary, was that a motion?
Oh.
I didn't know whether that was a motion.
Was that a motion? Okay, I'll move that we pass this to the city commission.
Is there so you're functioning as the local planning agency, and you are reviewing this ordinance for consistency with the Broward County land use plan, which in fact requires you to be consistent with the Broward County model ordinance. So your motion needs to be framed in a recommendation of approval, a recommendation to the city commission that you find it consistent with the comprehensive plan.
And I'm recommending that because we find it consistent with the city's comprehensive plan and the city's comprehensive everything. We don't necessarily find that it might be best for Fort Lauderdale, but we do find it consistent.
Sherry?
Okay, I was just going to read, is that a motion to recommend approval to the City Commission of case number UDP T22010, as the board finds that the text amendments are consistent with the comprehensive plan?
That was the motion. Is there a second?
Second, Steve Gannon.
Steve, you seconded it?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion before we put it to a vote?
I have one question. about the Sustainability Advisory Board. Wouldn't they be the ones, their existing board, that would review this sort of thing, that what Mary had brought up?
The Sustainability Advisory Board only recently added climate resilience to their mission statement. Previously, they were geared more towards sustainability and environmental type issues. When we previously brought the seawall ordinance forward, it was the Marine Advisory Board that acted as the main expert base board that advised whether they felt this was an ordinance that was in the best interest of the city.
Any other questions or comments?
Did you say that the Council for Lauderdale Civic Association meeting already happened or is happening soon?
This ordinance was brought before them in, I think it's in your packet, I believe it was March of 2021.
Right.
And it will be brought before them again in October for an update.
Right. Thank you.
And again, the Marine Advisory Board heard it on September 1st, which was just a few weeks ago.
So what is your deadline for the county? I mean, I'm just thinking, do we want to defer this until next month after you've been to the council?
So the deadline for the county is March of 2022.
Okay, so we already missed it. We're good.
We have already missed it, and we have been in constant contact with the county to let them know we are moving forward, keeping in mind that if we do not come into compliance, it can start to affect the city's ability to be compliant with the Broward County Land Use Plan, which could prevent us from making land use changes in the future.
So the action that the board is taking is, as I stated, you're reviewing this ordinance to see if it's consistent with the Broward County ordinance. So your approval of this, notwithstanding your concerns with regards to the text that you have stated on the record and the commission would have access to. When you vote on this motion, you're actually saying that this document is consistent with what the county has put forward, regardless of whether or not you agree with what the county has put forward and has mandated us to adopt.
And I don't know how we don't say it's consistent with the county. I mean, the point is we may not agree with the county and then we need to discuss how we're going to make the county change. But if this is what's consistent with the county, then I don't know how we find that it's not consistent with the county. We can find they're wrong, though, Jim.
I mean, if you make a broad statement and just say you have to improve tidal waters, then it's consistent with everything.
No. So what policy 2.21.7 of the Broward County Comprehensive Plan states is that in order to ensure coordination, consistency, and maximum effectiveness of improvements necessary to mitigate high tide flooding associated with realized and additional sea level rise through the year 2070, tidal influenced municipalities shall adopt within 24 months of the effective date of this policy regionally consistent top elevations for seawalls, banks, and berms, and other pertinent infrastructure, consistent with the findings and recommendations of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Broward County Flood Risk Management Study for Tidal Influenced Coastal Areas. These standards shall be consistent with Chapter 39, Article 25, Resiliency Standards of Flood Protection of the Broward County Code of Ordinance, which shall serve as the model ordinance and shall not be applicable to oceanfront beaches and shorelines seaward of the coastal construction control line. So the statement would have to be consistent with all of those things that are stated. Part of it is finding that it's consistent with the model ordinance adopted by Broward County.
And the directive for us to get this approved came over 2 years ago?
That's correct.
And can I just, if I may ask without offending anyone, like how are we just first hearing about it today?
I not necessarily understand the question with regards to why the Planning and Zoning Board hasn't heard of it until today.
But why are we
Not-
trying to passed it like over 2 years late.
Upon the Broward County adopting this ordinance, they put out the mandate to the municipalities. The timing of that was concurrent with COVID.
Right.
So there was a delay in developing, keeping in mind that we already had a seawall ordinance in place. So we had to work through the legal language of reviewing our ordinance in the context of the model ordinance. So that took some time, and again, during COVID, it was very hard to do that type of outreach. There were other issues related to workload that slowed the process. We did do the public outreach in March of 2021 with the hope that we would be able to move this forward in time for an adoption in the February 2022 timeframe. And again, there were a number of issues that slowed that process, especially related to the individual provisions that the city has put into the model ordinance that were necessary for us to feel compliant with our previous ordinance, such as the waiver and the discussion of what a appropriate maximum was. Those conversations were taking place. And at that point, we did not make our February target. And again, we have tried to move forward and have been in contact with Broward County, letting them know why there were delays and that we were making progress, but we just weren't there yet.
In addition to the workload that we get from the commission office, from interested citizens such as yourself with regards to various items, myself dealing with landscape ordinances and all of these very heavy, high priority stuff, there's a lot of background work that goes into it between staff, myself reviewing and speaking to them about keeping certain things within compliance with the model ordinance. I don't know how to communicate or have the board appreciate the level of work that goes on behind the scenes. I've already stated my frustration with Dr. Gassman on a number of ordinances that we've worked with together. Excuse me if I'll leave the statement there.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting in any way that this was slowed down because of legal's workload.
No,
yeah.
But I would definitely, I'm fine with that. I'm more, the board received the ordinance within the time frame of the process that they're accustomed to receiving it. So I'm more framing it towards that versus your truthful statements with regards to the process.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this was workload related. It also was related to other things that were staff was being assigned in order to ensure those priorities were met. So I don't think that there's a way that we can reasonably justify why we're late other than workload issues and a global pandemic had an impact on the timeline.
Okay, we got a motion from Mary and a second from Steve. Anybody else before we take it to a vote? I think Shari, you voiced how it should be framed, and everybody's on board with that. So let's call the roll.
Mr. Cohen,
No.
Mr. Scheckman,
No.
Mr. Barranco,
No.
Ms. Furtick,
Yes.
Mr. McTeague,
The part I'm struggling with is what we're tasked with doing is just confirming that this is in line with the county ordinance, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Ms. McCartney,
No.
Mr. Gannon,
Yes.
Mr. Rotella,
No.
Mr. Weymouth.
No.
6 noes and 3 yeses.
Okay.
Are we sending a message to the commission then that we do not feel this is compliant with the comprehensive plan?
I think a lot of people
Should we
can
make
take
that
the
motion
vote
in the
a lot of different
alternative?
ways. I'm not going to voice how the commission should take the vote. And it's 6-3 votes.
Well, what I'm asking is if we're making a vote that we're in compliance and that fails, should we make a vote that we're not in compliance, that this is not in compliance?
Turn that over to the legal staff. I think, we called a vote and we voted on it and it failed. So I think if that happens in any other case, you don't go back and say it the other way.
The only reason why I'd suggest your motion to recommend denial is just so it's clear of the reason why you want to recommend denial, because otherwise they just may not know. Because I heard lots of different comments. There were some saying you don't understand it, some saying it affects different people. So just one consensus on what your reason for recommending denial is, and that way it's really clear for the record. And that way if the commission asks staff to go back and rework it, then they know exactly what to do. So that's my only suggestion of why you should probably do a motion to recommend denial, if that's what you want to do.
I think it's probably a little more complex than that. I appreciate what you want, but you've got 6 people up here who voted no, and there may be 5 different reasons, or there may be 25 different reasons. So to try to voice why the no is, I'm not comfortable doing that. But if somebody wants to make an attempt at that, that gets everybody on board. But is there anybody that wants to make a motion against it? Well, hearing and seeing none, we leave it the way it is.
Can I just try one thing? Can I try, since we voted against this, and I don't know that you can even do this, well, if we could move to recommend to the city commission that they seek further input from the community at large before bringing this forward again.
I would reserve that for communications to the city commission. I would recommend reserving that for communications.
Or at least
Sorry,
just
Dwayne,
to,
did you say reserve that for communication to the city?
That's correct.
or at least just to have the council meeting. And
Okay, so it sounds like we're moving beyond this, which leads us to the next. Is there anything that we want to recommend to the city for the good of the city?
Excuse me, sorry, Chair, I just wanted to clarify, I might have misspoken, that it was 6 no's and 3 yeses.
Correct.
I said 4. Thank you.
And
Does
that
anybody
the
have
board
anything good
understands
for the
that would
city
be.
or communication to our city commissioners?
Okay.
Yes.
Is that you, Mary?
Yes. So I'm going to recommend, I think that what we're talking about tonight and the reason there's so much, there's no real clarity is because what's happening with sea level rise is happening so rapidly. And I know we have a sustainability advisory board, but I think this is an issue that deserves just sole focus. And that's what we're going to do, what we as a community are going to do to make our city resilient. I mean, I think it deserves a consideration by the city commission for a task force solely focused on this issue. And then we would probably have a greater understanding as a community about what's happening because they would be doing further community outreach. It's worked great with the infrastructure task force, which, believe it or not, when we first suggested that, not everybody thought that was a necessary thing, but it's turned out to be a good thing. Sometimes it's good to have a group who has a sole focus, and for that I would recommend that we ask the city commission to task a certain group with looking at these issues and coming forward with recommendations.
Dwayne, how does something like what Mary is suggesting get moved along? Does that have to be a motion? Or is it just her recommendation?
If it's a communication from the board, it would need to be a motion.
I was kind of making that as a motion,
well,
even though it was very wordy.
when would the commission hear it? When does the commission hear it?
Well, they wouldn't hear, the only thing they'd hear is a recommendation to the commission would probably be the next meeting, right?
So for efficiency, the clerk's office always takes the communications and puts it on the next available city commission meeting, which will not happen for tomorrow. That is generally against our office's advisement, which is typically your actions should wait until after you have an opportunity to approve the minutes of the forum meeting to ensure that we have the communication correct. But that's typically what happens. It's usually forwarded to the next meeting.
Okay. I think it'd be good for the commission to hear just what the Council of Civic Associations, if they have anything to say or feedback public, to bring public awareness to it, so for when they consider it. If the commission is able to hear it after that, that would be my recommendation to the commission.
Thank you so much.
My concern with that is that the next meeting at the Council of Civic Associations is going to be input on the PDD ordinance, and that's on October 11th, as I'm sure you're aware. And I think there's going to be a lot of people at that meeting. I don't know that this would really get a fair hearing, and Dr. Gassman is already scheduled to be there anyways, but not in the context of giving this the attention. I mean, look how much time we've spent on this tonight, and how many times we're acknowledging that we ourselves don't understand what the problem is. So I'm not sure if, and listen, that's fine with me, I don't care, and we do that and then we're in compliance, but I'm not sure we're really addressing what the issue is, which is what are we going to do as a city to make sure that we are preparing adequately for sea level rise, and how are we going to make sure that all of our code requirements support that.
And the way I see it, it's the way D. Wayne explained it earlier, is when we aren't in compliance with the comprehensive plan, then, we're in conflict as a city with the county somehow, and we don't get what we want on other things. So I almost think it's like a bargaining chip, because the county's done all this research, and they're shoving it down our throat, and we're just going to say, yes, we're consistent with the county, but what if the county's wrong? What if the Army Corps is wrong? I don't feel comfortable doing that. It's almost like we have to create that conflict just so we can understand what's going on, and maybe the county will look at Fort Lauderdale as a unique situation. We're on the ocean. We've got all these canals leading from Lake Okeechobee that drain out through our city. It's different than being in Plantation. It's something unique about us, and maybe the city has to have a little leeway or some other way of dealing with our issues versus what's happening out there. So I don't know what the next step is, and that's why I won't vote for it. Politically, I don't know what that does, Dwayne. What does the city do to go back to the county to get a new deal?
So do you support a task force, or you don't support it?
Absolutely. I think we should take it upon ourselves. I think we should take it upon ourselves to, choose our own destiny here rather than just saying we're consistent. I mean, what's the point of that? I don't know what we're consistent with. I don't know what kind of research they've done for Fort Lauderdale. So.
Yes, ma'am.
When the city originally proposed the seawall ordinance in 2016, our original ordinance stated that we felt that the minimum elevation of the seawall should be 4.6. Because the existing maximum elevation of the seawall in the city was at 3.9, through the rounds of public comment, the number that we ended up with in the ordinance was 3.9 as the minimum elevation. What the county has done is they've taken the city of Fort Lauderdale feedback that ended up being our adopted ordinance, worked with the Army Corps of Engineers to determine what that number should be, and here we are 6 years later, where they have said, no, 4.6 isn't the right number, 5 is. So the 5 aligns very closely to what the city's original proposal was for the seawall ordinance in 2016.
And obviously my motion was intended to say that I think the issues with sea level rise are well beyond this one. This is certainly an important issue, but I don't think it's the only issue. And that's why I think it's worth having the city appoint a group to focus on it, just like we did with infrastructure again, and that's worked out really well. And I just think that should be our recommendation.
Well, I don't know if I don't know if it's, I don't want to say worthy. I don't think it's necessary to have a recommendation. I think by the no vote, they'll know that we think that it needs more work. I mean, this is not a unique finite problem here and that there's a lot of things that play into it. So, I mean, if you want to make a motion, somebody wants to second it, we can vote on that too. Do you want to make a motion?
Well, I thought I did, that we recommend they create a sea level rise task force, for want of a better word, to make sure that that we are doing everything we can to plan for the future. I mean, we're the planning board and we're the local planning agency, and I don't think any of us has a good grasp on this, but we don't really have time in these meetings to research it, so it'd be good to task that to somebody and have them come forward with reports.
Okay.
It's a recommendation to the city.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, to the commission.
So there's a motion. Anybody want to second it?
I'll second that. I think that's great. We should have a task force for sea level rise in the city.
And Jay's going to be on it, right?
If I lose my job, I'll join.
We have a motion by Mary and a second by Jay. Any additional discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Cohen?
Yes.
Mr. Scheckman?
Yes.
Mr. Baranka?
Yes.
Ms. Furtick?
Yes.
Mr. Matee?
Yes.
Ms. McCartney?
Yes.
Mr. Gannon?
Yes.
Mr. Rotella?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes. All right. That did the city a lot of good. No, I think it's a first step.
I do too.
Yeah, we're sinking.
No, we're not sinking.
I mean,
The waters are rising.
Greta told me we're sinking.
Someday I'll take him out drinking and telling some stories about sea level rise. All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor, aye. Goodbye. Good night.
It's a second? Oh, thank you.